Okay, next component is water. All right. With water, I mean, what can we say about water? Well, I mean, we all know what water is, but it, again, is important in concrete because it is what mixes with the cement. So the cement and the water give us what's referred to as the cement paste. Okay? The water starts the chemical reaction. When you get cement and you add water to it, it starts this chemical reaction that ultimately will give us the strength. It'll harden the concrete. It gives us the strength in the concrete. We'll talk more about that later, but that's a very important component. We will talk about water hydrating the cement. Okay? We'll talk about the reaction as actually a hydration reaction, or it's called hydration. Okay? That's important because that's what gives concrete its strength. That's what ultimately hardens the concrete. So water is important. It's an important component or ingredient in concrete. What do we have to know about water? Well, I mean, really, it just has to be potable. Okay? And that just means what? Huh? Drinkable. Okay? It's drinkable water. So, I mean, it doesn't have chemicals in it, doesn't have garbage in it, it's drinkable. All right? It doesn't mean it has to be city water. You can use, cistern water collected from rainfall and whatnot. That's, perfectly okay to use. But it's got to be potable. With water and cement, you'll hear people, when they start talking about mixes, there's a very important characteristic that they'll talk about. And we'll talk about the water-cement ratio. Okay? And that's, when we start talking about mixes, that's an important characteristic or attribute of the mix. In fact, there could be a lot of attributes, a lot of characteristics that would give different properties to the mix. Probably the one that has the most impact would be the water to cement ratio. And up here, I said you add water to cement, it gives you the cement paste. And you might, okay, hey, that's a term, cement paste. Well, what does that really mean? Well, what it should mean for you is that's sort of the glue, or ultimately what will be the glue that holds the concrete together. It's a special type of glue, but back in kindergarten when you were making like the paste that you did your art projects with, and you made it by hand, you put like flour and some other stuff together, and you ate it, and the teacher would say don't eat it, and whatever. You put water in that, but the more water you put in, the more, what would happen? Paste would become more watery, more runny, wouldn't be as strong. The same sort of deal here. We got to put water and cement together in certain proportions, but the more water we use, the more runny the concrete becomes, and the weaker the paste is. Okay, so it sort of makes sense, but that's really important because water is not just tied to, already I've tied it to a couple things. I've tied it to how workable your concrete is, how runny it is, how fluid it is, but I've also tied it to strength. And it's tied to other things that are important to us too. So this water-cement ratio is really a big concept. There's a lot of attributes, a lot of characteristics in a mix. But probably if you were to point to one and you say, what's the most important? If there is a most important, it'd probably be water-cement ratio. We measure water-cement ratio typically by pounds. So pounds of water divided by pounds of cement. And so, you'll see this in specifications. I mean, if you get a project specification, you get to the concrete section, that concrete section will have the, probably a table listing the mix. In the mix in that table, it will say, oh, the water cement ratio is, for the concrete you're using in your footings and foundation is whatever, 0.47. So you'll see this, it as, some decimal number, 0.45, 0.47, 0.42, 0.51. And what they're talking about, that's the ratio of water to cement in that mix. All right? Again, things around in the 0.4s, 0.45 probably would be, if there is a typical, probably considered typical. But again, I hedge on that word typical because we can do a lot of different things with concrete. We can make concrete with water cement ratios down on the order of like 0.27. That's extremely dry. But we can add admixtures that can, help us out to make it workable. We can use it higher than this, but again, higher than this, if you're up at 0.6, it's really, really going to be liquid, very fluid mix, and the strength and other things probably aren't going to be that good. But anyway, we got a lot of leeway, a lot of different things we can do, but that's important. I should have probably said earlier, when we look at concrete mixes, or even, when we look at estimating concrete, the typical unit that I look at when I design a mix or when I look at estimating concrete is what? Cubic yard. All right. So, and that's the way we design a mix, proportion of mix for design is by the cubic yard. So a cubic yard, 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot block. All right, not that big, You know what that is. How much water do you think probably goes into a cubic yard? Huh? No. 1 cubic yard, how much water? How many pounds of water?
1.5 cubic yards.
How many pounds of water? Well, I'll probably say around 250 pounds. All right. So in the end, how many pounds is in a gallon?
8.
Yeah, 8 something. Around 8. Let's just say around 8. I think it's 8.34 or something if I'm not mistaken. But let's say 8. So you're talking 30 gallons, more or less. In a typical, we can do lower, we can do higher, but typical might be around there. You know how many pounds of cement? Well, yeah, I mean, if you just said 0.5 for water cement ratio, you'd say, around 500. Around, 500. Now that's in cubic yard. How many pounds is in a bag? 94. So probably the typical mix, if there is such a thing as a typical mix, probably has about 6 bags of cement in it. So that's when we talk about cement being expensive before, you can see probably why it's more expensive. How much does 250 pounds of water cost? Well, yeah, it could be free if you're collecting it, in a cistern or something. So, yeah, it depends. If you're doing city water, it costs something, but, again, not horribly expensive, I guess. All right? So, questions on that?